Hey, it's Chef Scoobs. Welcome back to Scoob's Kitchen. Today on the show, I'm talking with Johnathon Pauley. Johnathon's done many things over his culinary career, from opening over a dozen restaurants to owning his own chef consultant company. He's even raised meat rabbits for local restaurants. Before we get started, just a reminder that if you enjoy the show, don't forget to leave a review. And if you want early access to episodes plus exclusive monthly bonus episodes, consider becoming one of our Patreon members. You can find details at patreon.com/scoobskitchen. All right, let's do it. Johnathon, it's great to meet you, man. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Awesome. I appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, you bet. I'm excited to talk to you. I was reading through your bio, and I see things on there like 20 years in the restaurant industry, like Cordon Bleu, culinary director, chef consultant. And at the very bottom, I read, also runs a small rabbitry that provides meat rabbits to restaurants. And I'm like, this guy's a fucking rabbit farmer.
A lot of rabbits.
We'll come back to this, but how did that happen?
I've tried to get out of the operations of restaurants a few times in my career. You can end up easily working somewhere 90, 100 hours a week. I was talking to one of my vendors one day, and he said, there's not really a good provider of meat rabbits in Texas. So you have to buy all your rabbits frozen in from France or in from wherever. I know there's a bunch in South America. I live on 60 acres out in the middle of nowhere in Texas, actually. I was like, well, what can we do with land? Rabbits. So I started breeding rabbits, and I have, I don't know how many are out there right now. I have about 40 breeding does and then 3 bucks. But a rabbit in its lifetime can produce more meat than a cow.
Well, you always hear this, they fuck like rabbits. Is that true? I mean, yeah. Is it very easy to replicate rabbits?
Well, it's easy to replicate them, but they're also very fragile. You've heard the phrase scared to death. You can scare a rabbit to death. So you have to be like calm around them. Kids can't be running around. There's mortalities to deal with. I had a skunk. I tractor rabbits, which means like the grow outs. I put them out in not like a tractor, not like a John Deere, but a structure that goes on the grass. And then, you move it a few times a day and they eat the grass underneath it. So they're kind of like grass fed, kind of. I still give them grain and stuff. But a skunk actually came through, sprayed the rabbits in it, and I lost the whole tractor.
No shit.
Just from the skunk spray. So they're super fragile. And that's, of course, why they breed so many. You might have, 10 kits in a litter, maybe even more. In the wild. I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm sure that it's probably rare to get more than 1 or 2 kits survive to adulthood.
So kits are the young.
The little babies, yeah.
I mean, obviously there's different types of rabbits, but what's the difference between a meat rabbit that you would find on a restaurant menu and just something that you would see out in your backyard?
So most rabbits you see in your backyard are cottontails, right? Not really great for eating, super tiny. If you were to try to process that rabbit, you'd probably get less than a pound of yield. The rabbits that I breed are Tamic composites, which is a rabbit that was specifically bred by Texas A&M to be the perfect meat rabbit to live in Texas. They have huge ears, so they can regulate heat in the summer. Some of my breeding does are like 14, 15 pounds. They're absolutely massive.
My God.
They're huge.
That's a dog.
Yeah, they're giant.
Wow. So, okay. So if you sell to restaurants, you have some USDA oversight, or how does that work?
So in Texas, you can get a rabbit and poultry exemption, which allows me to sell under 10,000 rabbits a year to restaurants without a USDA inspector. That being said, I had to send the state chemist standard operating procedures on how we go about butchering. I have to have like a HACCP plan in place, stuff like that. But you don't have to have an inspector on site. I have an exemption number I have to put on every carcass saying that this was processed in a uninspected facility. And but so if you get up over 10,000 rabbits, I think you have to have an office for the inspector on site. Now, if they ever come and sit in that office, probably not for the rabbits, but you have to do a little bit more.
So you're like the only game in town then. Are there other ranches or farms that breed rabbits over 10,000 a year?
Definitely not in Texas. You're breeding that many rabbits, you're going to have to cryovac and freeze them. And the rabbit flesh is so like delicate that I find once you cryovac the rabbit, all the hemoglobin, it just gets shot back into the meat and really damages the texture. I've talked to a lot of people that raise rabbits out here, and most of them do it for raw feeding for dogs, or they do it, as pets. And a lot of people struggle because there's just so much that can go wrong, and you just got to keep like pivoting to make your rabbitry work.
Wow, that's great. It's one of those things where it's like a whole world that you don't really think exists, but obviously it does. You're probably doing pretty good with this around the DFW area.
Yeah, we should be coming up on our spring harvest. Rabbits go sterile in the summer and they don't breed. In the spring, I have rabbit available for a few months. Early winter, I'll have rabbit available for a few months. So, and then in the winter, you don't want kits when it's like freezing, because then it's too cold for them. So you got to kind of have 2 harvests a year. It's just in season for a short period of time, and then the rest of the year you just got to kind of maintain them.
So is that because of the heat in Texas, or do all rabbits go sterile in the summer?
Most rabbits really struggle with the heat. In Texas, right after COVID, we had a horrible blizzard, lost power for like over a week throughout Texas. It was awful. I don't know if you heard about that. We call it snowvid.
I did.
It got down to like, I don't know, -10, -15 out here. And out here, there's no buildings or trees, or there's trees, but they're small. And so, we had like 60-mile-an-hour winds out here. And, we didn't lose a single rabbit. They were happy as could be with the snow and everything. You just throw some ice in there. They eat the ice. They're happy clams. But in the summer, the heat takes a real toll on rabbits. And I'm assuming it's the same with wild rabbits, because the heat is just so hard on their little bodies.
I had no idea about any of this. So you grew up in Texas, right? You're a Texan for life. You grew up there. You went to school there. You run a business there.
Yeah, I grew up in Fort Worth. Worked in some restaurants there. Then I went to school in Dallas. Opened a couple restaurants in Dallas, and then I did move to California for a little while with King Seafood Company, and I worked in their Santa Monica Water Grill, and then I helped them open their Orange County Water Grill, which is in Irvine, and then I moved back to Dallas with that same company and opened their Dallas Water Grill.
I've been to the one in Irvine. It's over by South Coast Plaza.
It is. It's massive, huh?
I love that restaurant. I was there on business, and I was with two sales guys, and they had me order, what was it, stone crab? I think it was the stone crab. And they're like, yeah, it'll be good. And then I get the bill, and it was like $60 for 4 little pieces.
Like 2 bites?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
2
crazy.
bites. It's like, God damn it.
That restaurant is the craziest. That particular one is the craziest restaurant I ever worked in. We do like over 1,000 covers a night on like the weekends, on Friday and Saturday. And, the PPA is close to 100, if not more. So, you could potentially just on Friday and Saturday do $250,000 in sales.
Orange County is one of those amazing little food-centric little hotspots. There's so many restaurants in such a small little area, and you can get whatever you want. I mean, any kind of cuisine. In Dallas, I was looking up on the Michelin site, and I was like, God, how many starred restaurants, or at least like Bib Gourmand restaurants, are in Dallas Fort Worth? And there were none. And I don't know if that's because the Michelin guide doesn't cover that area. Do you know? I'm shocked
Michelin doesn't come to Texas.
What happened there?
Why? I don't
feel
know,
like something
Dallas
happened.
is one of the big food cities.
Yeah, it's up there with any other, Boston, LA, Chicago, New York. So I'm wondering if something happened. I'll have to look into this.
We've had some James Beard nominees over the years. It's just been a thing that's been accepted. We were just like, yeah, Michelin doesn't come to Texas. We're not worried about it. The Michelin guide's great, but a lot of those restaurants are for fun, right? You're not there to make money. You're there to just open an awesome restaurant.
It's your social media restaurant, and then you got your side gig that actually makes you a living.
Yeah.
You a big barbecue fan?
I do like barbecue. Barbecue game out here is crazy, though. One of my friends is actually the smoke master at Hurtado Barbecue in Arlington. Have you heard of that?
I haven't, no.
You should look it up later. It's awesome. They have like just a line the whole time they're open. And in Texas, like a good barbecue restaurant, it opens in the morning and they just close after they run out of barbecue. And there'll be just like a line the whole time. They're about to start using the beef from the 4 Sixes Ranch. Taylor Sheridan, who's the producer of like Yellowstone and all that jazz, owns the 4 Sixes Ranch. And so they're gonna get their beef into there. I'm super excited for them.
Man, I fucking love barbecue, and not just any barbecue, because there's different styles. And when we talk about styles, it's the sauce mainly. So you got Texas, which is like that hickory, salty, little spice to it, and then you got St. Louis, the real thick sweet sauce, which I'm not a big fan of. And then you got the Carolinas, which is like a thinner sauce, which is less tomato, a little bit more peppery. But man, if you offer me Texas barbecue, I can't turn that down. I've been to Dallas area a few times, been to Houston. You're going to give me some shit because I've been to 2 places and they're both chains, but they're pretty good in my opinion. They're Lockhart and Heart 8. You've been to either of those?
Yeah, Lockhart. great. Hard Eight, I've actually never been to Hard Eight, but at first when you said chains, I thought you were gonna say Dickies, and I was like, this guy right here.
Oh no,
But
man, I'm not that bad. We have it. We had a
yeah,
Dickies. We had a Dickies in. I mean, they're all over the place, but I used to live in Arizona, and that was Dickies was like the only barbecue in town.
barbecue's huge out here, super competitive. Actually, one of my consulting clients right now, Smoke and Fire, I help them kind of get their barbecue situation under control over there. They're using an electric conveyor smoker, pretty consistent. You don't have to sit there for like 16 hours a day spraying it with apple cider vinegar or barbecue madness each particular smoke master does, but it produces a consistent product, and then they pick it up using sous vide. So
Mm.
it's impressive. Way to add barbecue to the menu without the crazy labor involved.
All the things they don't teach you at Cordon Bleu.
Man, I hardly remember culinary school. People always ask, like, how was culinary school? Did you learn a lot? Was it worth it? And I'm like, man, all I remember is I'd get up 5 in the morning, go to work at 6, work like 9, 10 hours, and then drive to Dallas, and then go from 7 to midnight in school. I remember falling out of my chair because I was asleep. I remember sleeping on the road, and I remember, wishing it was a little more difficult because I'd already been in the industry for 5 years by the time I went. They want you to graduate, I think, and I don't think that when you get into the industry, there's going to be that same, level of babying you along. So I think culinary schools really need to push their students a lot harder. And if some students flunk out, I think that's okay. I know it's probably not good for the school's bottom line, but Le Cordon Bleu got sued by a lot of their prior students because they led a lot of people to believe they were going to make a lot more money than they would when they got out, and they said they were going to help them place them in jobs, but then the school was too easy, and so they weren't prepared for those jobs even when they did get placed. I think out of my class, there's only maybe like 2 people that are still in the kitchen besides me, and I'm out on a consultant now. I'm not even in the kitchen every day.
Do you think it's
Tough road there.
necessary? There's 2 paths, right? You on the job training, you start as a dishy, you learn the ropes, you get on the line, and you just move your way up. And then there's these folks that go to culinary school, and half the time they still start out on the line. So, like,
Yeah,
what do you
I
think
think
these days?
I think school is important, but not necessarily culinary school. And if you do want to go to school to be a chef, and you want to go to some sort of culinary program, you don't need to go to Le Cordon Bleu or Art Institute. You need to go to school. Go to a college that offers. There's a school in Dallas called El Centro. It's a community college, but they have a culinary program. You're still taking your math classes and all your literature and everything, and all of that is important. It's great that you can cook, but there's so much math that goes into running a kitchen, and you need to be able to communicate. There's just so much that goes into it. So I think school is very important, and you're going to meet a lot of people. I think the most undervalued thing about going to college is the people that you meet there that become your lifelong friends. Those people are going to become your business partners along the way, later down the road. And a huge hurdle is the paywall for opening a restaurant for chefs. And so what we see in the industry now is most of the people that own restaurants are people that, made money, built some tech company and then sold it. And now they have a bunch of money. They don't know what to do with it. So they decide to open a restaurant. They've been successful in other industries, so they think they know how to run a business. So then it goes out of business, 8 months later. The chefs need to be the owners of the restaurants. That's how we can have an industry where 9 out of 10 restaurants don't go out of business the first year.
Well, I want to get into that a little bit with you because you had mentioned a couple things in your bio. So you've done everything, man. You started as a dishy, you worked your way up to an executive chef. You've done all these things outside the kitchen, and then you were on an opening team for over a dozen restaurants. What was that like?
Yeah, I love opening restaurants. You get to put together the team, you put together menus, you get to organize everything, and really set it out on the right path. And there's so many challenges to opening a restaurant, from managing your subcontractors, make sure you get all your equipment in at the right time so you're not storing equipment for 4 months. Like, you don't have to, and then moving it around, getting it damaged. You have to create all your standard operating procedures. You got to get your menu ready and cost it out. And you have to do all the timing right because, restaurants get pushed back. The day-to-day of a restaurant operations can become super grueling. If you're in the same restaurant for like 3 years doing the same thing every day. So going to open restaurants that's really my passion, is opening new places.
The statistics for restaurants failing after their first year is just astounding. It's like 9 out of 10. What do you attribute most of those failed restaurants to?
Well, I think the number one thing is, lack of capital. You go into a restaurant, you say your budget is $1 million, right? And so you spend, $500,000 on building it out, and then you spend $200,000 on the FF&E. So you've got 300,000 left. Now you have to train everyone, and you have to buy your opening inventory. So now, you're coming down the line. You got $80,000 left. You think you're good, but then for the first 3 months, you're like, oh, I didn't order this, oh, I didn't order that, I need to retrain these people because I lost them. Retraining is expensive. Oh, I didn't take into account that I was going to spend $40,000 on my soft opening. And so now you're going into month 3, you're coming to the chef, you're like, chef, cash flow is rough, we need to cut labor, we need to make sure that we're not ordering too much. So now you start 86ing items. You don't have enough people on the line. You start getting bad reviews. And then it snowballs, right? Now you're going to be slower because people are upset you're out of stuff. People are upset the food's not good. People are upset that their service was slow, that their drinks took 25 minutes. And then they shut the doors. You have to have that cushion for at least the first 12 months. Don't even think about you're going to make money. Like if you are going to rely on that restaurant for the first 12 months to make money, don't do it. Go open a food truck, go buy a house and rent it out, go do something else. You have to have that 12 months of cushion, and just assume you're going to need to do cash injections or have plenty of money in the bank for that first 12 months. All your cooks on month 1 are going to be horrible compared to that same cook on month 12. On month 12, maybe that cook can, work 1.5 stations versus half a station that first month. But you've got to train everyone, and you have to give them the time to get their feet under them. And if you don't have that capital, the restaurant's not going to make it.
You'd mentioned that chef owners are really the only way to go. And is that because they understand all of these things versus the investor who comes in and just throws money at a problem?
Well, not all chefs understand that. We tell these, the cooks and the next generation of chefs that they need to be businessmen. There's a huge problem in almost every restaurant I've worked in that has gone out of business. You see the owner like just drinking too much. It's a huge problem, is owners drinking in the restaurants. If someone came to offer me a job today, I wouldn't take it unless the owner agreed a zero tolerance policy for owners and managers and employees not drinking in the restaurant. I've seen just horror stories of stuff that's happened in the restaurants when the owners are just drinking too much. I can think of 4 restaurants right off the top of my head that I opened. They were great, won awards, went out of business because the owner couldn't control their alcoholism.
You brought up a good point. And when I was talking to Akshay, he was mentioning mental health, and we didn't really get into it, but I really wanted to. It's an industry, I think, that goes unnoticed when it comes to mental health. Talk a little bit about your thoughts on mental health in the restaurant industry.
We're just cooking food. We're not doing open heart surgery. We're just a bunch of cooks feeding people. It's okay. It's okay to breathe. It's okay that things go wrong. And I think that that's a mentality people need to go to work with every day. But then on the other hand, it's a very competitive industry, and everyone and their mother thinks they can run a restaurant. So the restaurant that only lasted 10 months versus your restaurant, it's been open for 6 years. If there's a market share between the two of you of $8 million and that other restaurant did 2 million, they still pulled 2 million of your market share out. So all these restaurants that pop up and go out of business because people don't know what they're doing makes the restaurant industry ridiculously competitive. And then those restaurants that don't know what they're doing drive prices down because they don't know how to cost their menus. So then you're forced to, try to cost your menu at a 30% cost instead of a 20% cost, which you really need to do. And so then you can't pay your staff well. So you have to work them super hard. That just makes a recipe for chefs that have to work 70, 80 hours a week, line cooks that have to just perform, don't take breaks, don't sit down, don't drink water. And it just leads to just a whole mess of mental health issues. And then those cascade into like the macho culture in the kitchen where like, oh, I'm tired. I worked 55 hours this week. And then the other guy's like, oh, I remember my first part-time job. No, like
yeah.
You shouldn't
55.
be working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week. The realtor that's selling your house isn't working 70 hours a week, and they're making plenty of money. There's no reason that chefs or cooks should be expected on a regular basis to work more than 40 hours a week.
And then you have the U.S. legislation talking about moving to a 4-day work week. Well, that doesn't work in certain industries. And how is that going to work in the restaurant industry?
I mean, what's that mean though? It's not just the restaurant industry. Think of like a convenience store. Those aren't going to go to a 4-day work week. That's only going to be good for office people, which at this point, a lot of office jobs are semi-remote anyway. So I think, moving that 4-day work week is just, kind of pandering, in my personal opinion. A restaurant that really cares about their employees could easily run a 4-day work week, 4 10-hour shifts for their employees. And I know it's hard to run a restaurant. I know things are expensive. You have to charge the right price and you have to do the right work. And if you can't do the right work, just don't open a restaurant.
Well, I feel like you've transitioned your career in a way that I think a lot of chefs would love to envision their own careers. I mean, you worked your ass off in kitchens, and then you had this thought of, well, how can I continue this out of the kitchen? You got into Club Core, which I'd like to hear a little bit about. And Club Core has actually been rebranded, just so everyone knows, as a company called Invited. And Invited is a company that manages over 200 private golf clubs around the U.S. And you were the culinary director for a time.
It was an interesting company to work for. And I worked for corporations before that really had it together. Like, one good example was I worked for Payway in high school. Everything was tight, so tight. Like, their market chef would come in and they'd pull out your bell peppers and they'd have a ruler. And if they weren't 1 inch by 1 inch, 8 out of 10, they'd throw your whole 6-pan away and be like, cut all those over again, right? They were tight. Their inventory controls were tight. Their menu is tight. And then you look at a company like Club Corp where you think that it's going to be the same situation, right? Because there's hundreds of them, right? And they're all making tons of money. Each property is cash flowing millions of dollars. What I found was the culinary side was kind of like left behind, and they had kind of ignored the culinary side. Their standard operating procedure for picking up their ribs was like, wrap it in plastic, put it in the microwave for 30 seconds, and then put it on the grill. And it was just like a nightmare. And they were trying to have like a culinary renaissance, basically. We went through a lot of directors of operations above us that wanted different things. Like, worked for one guy that wanted us to change the whole menu every week, which was wild, right? Try to imagine running, 2 properties with multiple dining rooms, multiple menus to have to change every week. But then each property has to have a different, like, they didn't want menus that overlapped. And then they didn't have like standard operating procedures. Like, they did inventory on Excel.
For people that haven't experienced this or maybe haven't thought about it, what's the difference between being a corporate chef versus working in a kitchen?
Chef at a private restaurant, if you need to turn the ship, it's pretty easy, right? You're like, okay, this isn't selling. Let's just change it to something else, right? As long as the owner's, reciprocal to change. Now, in a large corporation, you're gonna have to do tastings. You're gonna have to submit a bunch of paperwork. You're gonna have to do this. You're gonna have to do that. Now, when I worked for Club Corp, it was kind of run more like a small restaurant was. Now, when I worked for Water Grill, which was a corporation, if you wanted to make a menu change, you had to fly out to California. There was a tasting panel.
Act of
You'd have to
God.
present your food cost. Yeah, it was wild. The people would taste it. They got the bean counters in there, making sure that they're part of the tasting panel, making sure that the food cost is in line. They tell you what they like, tell you what they don't like, might go back, cook it some more. And it's very expensive and very time consuming to change any menus in a corporate environment. Or if there's like a standard operating procedure, like the way you do inventory that isn't working, you just got to keep doing it, whether it works or not. So in a private restaurant, though, I mean, it's kind of like the Wild West. You can just kind of do whatever you want as long as the owner's on board. And there's a lot more freedom in how you hire and how you train your staff. The flip side of that is a private restaurant. If your fryer breaks and you don't have, $1,200 in your account to go buy a new fryer, well, you might be working with one fryer for a few weeks until you can save up that money to purchase a new fryer. Things might stay broken longer. And then working country clubs versus private restaurants. In the country club, your food cost is kind of a little bit high. They'd say, hey, chef, your food cost is a little high. In the private restaurant, your food cost is a little bit high. You're like, hey, chef, your food cost is a little high, so we couldn't pay rent this month. I guess we're all fired.
Did you like that stress and certain accountability of working at these corporations versus a private restaurant?
When I worked at Water Grill, I really liked the level of accountability and stress there because they kind of had it together. You know what I mean? They, like, every night, the closer would have to count all the proteins, count all the oysters. They ran their inventory and food cost by a variance. So at the end of the month, you weren't like held accountable to like a 28% food cost. You'd be held accountable to like a 1.5% variance. So based on your, what your theoretical food cost was supposed to be based on your product mix, you would go count everything and they'd say, well, it looks like you're missing 32 pounds of octopus. What happened? So we'd do that at every Wednesday, every week, we'd figure it out. And then every night you'd go count all the steaks, count all the fish, count all the oysters. And you might be, 3, 4 in the morning after your shift, you're sitting there trying to figure out why you're missing 2 steaks. You got to email corporate. Well, all that's like super stressful. Like the level of professionalism, it feels great. You know what I mean? You've been to that water grill, you see the kitchen, it's pristine. That I really enjoyed. The how busy it is, the stress level. It was a lot of fun. Sometimes when you work in a smaller, family-owned restaurant, things slip through the cracks. You don't know exactly what's going on. Everything feels loosey-goosey. It's a different kind of stress. You're not being held accountable to like why you're missing this steak, but you're being held accountable to keep the doors open. So it's just
Yeah.
like both are very stressful. And running small restaurants, in my opinion, is much more difficult than running large restaurants. Every business has its challenges.
So you have your own business, right? So you're a chef consultant, tired chef consulting.
Yeah, so over the years I'd be working somewhere, someone would call me like, "Hey man, can you help me do this? Can you help me with that?" Do some menu items for them, and I'm like, "Man, this is great." I just cook some stuff or show them how to do their inventory or help them organize or whatever. And I was like, I really enjoy that. It was a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. I wanted to buy a house. I decided I would start doing overnight cleanings in restaurants. So I'd come in, mop the floors and clean. I was the executive chef at J2 Steakhouse at this point. So I was already working like 60, 70 hours a week. Great restaurant it was. But anyways, I would go after I got off work to other restaurants after I finished cleaning J2, clean their floors, clean their bathrooms, maybe clean equipment if that was on the list. And then on my days off, I would go to restaurants that needed like deep cleanings or restaurants that shut down that needed all the equipment like pulled out and cleaned, maybe thrown away, and do odd gigs like that. So then I was able to buy a house, and I was a very tired chef at the time. So I thought it was a clever name. Probably wouldn't have named it that now, but it does get attention. And then it kind of moved more into, people wanted me to come consult for them. And, people just call me like, "Hey, I'm opening this restaurant. Can you come over and help me do a menu? Or can you help me, I'm moving into a bigger space. Can you come over here and help me kind of set my kitchen up, show me what needs to be done?" So I've been doing that for a few years. A few days a week, I will go to the restaurants, work on their prep lists with them, talk to their chef about some new recipes, see what items they needed ordered.
So you have a true entrepreneurial spirit. You're out there grinding every day. Has that always been what you envisioned your culinary career to be?
Not really. And when I first started out, I didn't necessarily want to be a chef. I was kind of hungry, so I needed some money. So I got a job as a dishwasher at the Black Eyed Pea. I was making $5 an hour, $5.15 was the minimum wage at the time.
But you got free food.
Got free food. They Black Eyed Pea, you could eat as much rolls and cornbread as you wanted. So that was great.
Beautiful.
And then worked there for like a year. I was like working the fry station before I left. And at that time I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I got another job. I was making $7.50 an hour. I was rich, just so rich, making $7.50 an hour. Ended up in the kitchen there. Graduated high school. It was like 6 months later. My kitchen manager's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Why are you still here? Are you gonna go to college or something?" And I'm like, I don't know what I want to do." He's like, "Well, why don't you go to culinary school? You're like a really good cook." Because I was doing well there, and so I was like, "Okay, let me go check it out." So then I went to the Cordon Bleu, and then I started going like a few weeks later. But I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I was telling my oldest son last night, on my way to high school, I used to stop at Kroger, and I'd get a box of 24 cookies in some Ziploc bags, and I'd put those cookies 2 per bag, and I'd sell them 2 for $1. Always been hustling, trying to make money.
I think some people, maybe a lot of people, get into the industry and it just kind of becomes a dead end thing where they're cooking and they're working 70 or 80 hours a week and eventually they'll retire. And that goes back to the education part, like you said, how it's so important. It's not just about cooking food. It's about learning the ropes. It's about learning how the business works and how the world works and how humans work and being able to evolve from that. And I look at what you've done as just a great way to progress and then a segue into retirement. You're not working 70, 80 hours a week. You're still making good money. You're doing the consultant thing. Eventually you'll be done. Young people that may be listening that want to do this route, what do you suggest for them?
It's important to keep your expenses as low as possible. Say you're living in Dallas. You want to go live in a high-rise apartment for $3,000 a month. Don't do that, or you're never going to be free. You're never going to be able to see your family. You're going to spend all your money. You're going to spend 80 hours a week at work, and you're going to spend all that money on that apartment you're never even going to be in. But then don't be afraid to invest your money into something, whether it's buying a house, buying some property you'll never see, just something that your money has to work for you. I would love to open an awesome restaurant one day, but like I said at the beginning of our conversation, don't open a restaurant unless you can do it right. So I would love to open an awesome restaurant, but I want to make sure that I don't need any income from that restaurant. If you want to be a really great chef and put out awesome food, you're not going to be able to do that if you're worried about how you're going to pay for your next fish order.
And doing what you're doing now, you can still raise rabbits. Is there money in this? Can you make a living raising rabbits?
Can I make a living? Probably not. I make a little bit of money on the rabbits. It's not great. I actually make more money selling the byproducts of the rabbits on Etsy than I do selling the rabbits to restaurants.
What? Explain this.
They have pelts and ears and feet and stuff.
Yeah.
I just dehydrate them, sell them on Etsy as dog treats. And I'm working on a deal to sell all their manure. Rabbits shit a lot, so there's a lot of manure. I mean, the manure will probably make me more than the rabbit carcass itself. People are not willing to pay what they should for food. People will pay, $80 for a new pair of shoes that was made by someone in China making 25 cents a day. They're not going to pay $60 for a rabbit dish. So the food is super underpriced. So it's hard to make money on the selling the carcasses to restaurants, but the byproducts from rabbits can be quite profitable.
That's fascinating. This has been great, man. I really appreciate you coming on here. Take a minute and tell everybody, if you want to let them know how to find you and what you want to share.
My website's tiredchef.com. You need help with your restaurant, you need help running your kitchen, you need help with your mental health, I don't know, anything, just shoot me an email. I'm working on putting together a supper club. There's a supper club link on there. And if you're interested in hosting one of those in your home, you can email me as well.
Pleasure having you here, and take care, and we'll talk to you later.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Bye, everybody.
Bye.